Jamie Flinchbaugh is here with us today. He's an accomplished entrepreneur, senior executive, consultant, and board member with over 30 years of learning oriented experience spanning a range of many roles and industries. As the founder of J Flinch, Jamie leverages his operational, strategic, and consulting experience to serve as an asset to companies seeking to build culture, capability, leadership, and their overall operating systems. Over the last 20 years, Jamie has helped build nearly 20 companies as a co-founder, board member, advisor, or angel investor, and also co-authored the best-selling book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to Lean: Lessons from the Road. Welcome, Jamie. We're super pumped to have you with us today. And we also have another guest online with us right now. Her name is Kristen McLean. Kristen works with a company called the Vivid Ink Company, where she and her team transform the spoken word, like the webinar we're about to hear today, into lasting and actionable works of art. And that illustration she does will be included in your recap that goes out after. Speaking of that, yes, this webinar will be recorded and accessible after the fact on both petracoach.com and in your recap. Also, a reminder to everyone that this is an interactive session, so notice the chat box and the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Those will be your best friends throughout the session. We want to know what you want to know. Today, we're going to talk about problem solving. So whether strategic or tactical, organizations have to solve problems in order to drive performance. It is one of the most essential core capabilities. However, most organizations attempt to improve their problem solving by just tossing around a bunch of problem solving tools. And just like you don't become a car mechanic by learning to turn a wrench, organizational problem solving is about a lot more than just a toolbox. Truly strong problem solving organizations are based on capabilities and on culture. So today, Jamie's going to talk to us about the role of a leader in building a strong problem solving organization and how to find the leverage to move your team forward as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Jamie and disappear and let you do your thing.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here, everyone. First, you'll notice I'm going to be drawing two. So Kristen will be probably far more artistic than I ever can be, but I don't use PowerPoint. I prefer just sort of whiteboard or blackboard. So I'll be drawing a bit as we go, just to express my thoughts on this topic. Also, I encourage you to ask questions as we go. I'll certainly take them at the end as well, but we do have a chat or the question box open. So really encourage you to ask questions. As one of the benefits of not being held hostage by a PowerPoint is I can kind of go where things need to go, where your questions might take us rather than simply just where my slides want to take me. So please do use the Q&A function, all you like to ask questions along the way. We'll try not to miss any as we go. So I'm going to talk about problem solving as something that's one of these things that we quite frankly take for granted. We take it for granted because we start solving problems when we are infants, when we are incredibly young, and we start learning how to solve problems. And so as a result, as we do that, we sort of forget that there's opportunities to think about how to solve problems in different ways, particularly when we come inside organizations and we solve problems inside the organization. I believe problem solving, when you think about it in its broad sense, it's the heart of strategy. Strategy is about how to set a direction and overcome gaps. How do I go do that? Well, to me, that's problem solving. Problem solving is about sales. It's helping solve a customer's problems and understanding how to close that gap with solutions that you help put in place. And so, whether it's execution, whether it's strategic, whether it's operations, whether it's sales, whether it's legal or financial, I believe problem solving is the lifeblood of most organizations. It combines analytical and creative. It combines experience and talent and puts all of it together to help us achieve what we need to achieve day in, day out. So I do have, I believe this so much that I have a new book coming out. I'll say I don't know when. I don't have a cover designed. I don't have a due date. It's just that it's forthcoming, called People Solve Problems. It's part of what I've been writing about, and it really is sort of problem solving tool agnostic. It is about the people side. It's about the culture, the behaviors, the leadership, the coaching, those other people oriented sides of problem solving. So, whatever problem solving tools your organization uses, or even if they don't use any, I believe a lot of what we're going to talk about today during this session will still apply. So I'm going to look at some of the things that we're going to talk about, and I'll start zooming in here. We'll go dive into these topics. We're going to really talk about this from the role of the leader. So whether you're the leader, as in the founder, whether you're an executive, whether you lead a team, whether you're an informal leader, it really, quite frankly, doesn't matter. But the leader is someone, in my definition, who simply takes responsibility for moving the organization forward. Now, if you're the founder CEO, you have different tools in your toolbox available to you than if you were an individual contributor. But leader or leadership is about taking all those tools that you have available to you, moving the organization forward so they are somewhere different when you are done. So we're going to talk about three main roles, sort of being the system and the cultural architect. How are you thinking about designing the system and designing the culture that you want around problem solving? We're going to talk about shaping and coaching problem solving. So when others are doing problem solving, how do you shape it? How do you coach it? We don't get so deep into that in the time that we have, but fundamentally important because we're not going to own every problem. And then as part of that, also, how do we solve our own problems? How do we think about how my problems might be different than my team's problems and how that goes together? So I'm going to start up here with the system and cultural architects. Let's start at the system level. I want you to think about, you have a team member who experiences a problem, right? So they come about, they experience some barrier, they experience that problem. One of my favorite questions to ask organizations when I get in and start to do any kind of assessment is essentially, if you experience that problem, what do you do next? Right? What is the answer? What do I do? Is it an act of willpower? All right. Do I go off in that direction? Do I pull a team together? Do I get a coach? Do I take out a problem solving tool? What happens when I experience a problem? Well, the answering that question is really, what is our system? What is our system and for how we engage with the problems around us, right? So as I think about this and we think about our problems, we need to design our work. We design our work, we manage our work, we improve our work. All of this is part of problem solving. And essentially, how do I do that consistently across the organization? How do I allow all these folks to go off and design, manage, and improve their work and not end up going off in a bunch of 1,000 different directions? One of my favorite quotes is, if you cry forward, you have to make clear in which direction to go. That's part of building a system that makes this work. How do I design that system? So you have to be paying attention to a bunch of things and make sure that the teams have ways in which they can work that makes problem solving more effective, more efficient, and more consistent across the team, across the organization. So I'm going to lay out just an example of that, right? Because we can get into a lot of different pieces here. Just an example of that, start to lay out how to think about pieces of the system. So one component we start to think about is, what is a problem? Right? If we go to organizations and ask that simple question, we're going to get a whole lot of different answers. Well, we should find that in a consistent way. So there's a couple of pieces of that. One is that we have many different sources of problems in our organization. We might have some metrics that we track over time, and a metric going off in the wrong direction starts to become a problem. We might open our inbox and we have a complaint from a customer or an employee or wherever, a partner, and somewhere in our inbox there are problems that are defined. We might have standards that say this is how we're supposed to do the work, and someone runs into a barrier where they can't do the work as it's designed to be done. Point is, we have a landscape of problems. We have problems coming at us from all over. Well, I can't engage with all of them. So in part, it's how do I manage that landscape? How do I take all these different sources of problems and say, in the end, here's my list. Here's the problems that we want to be solving. Now, part of that also requires defining what is a problem, not just where do they come from, but what is a problem. So if I believe, for example, that as soon as you're 5% behind schedule, that is a problem. And you think it's not a problem until you're 20% behind schedule. Well, in between there, from 5 to 20%, we're going to be on very different pages. I'm going to be coming at you hard, hammering away, asking what you're going to do to resolve the situation. And you're wondering what the big fuss is all about. We ultimately have to get aligned on what is a problem so that when we get to that 5% or that 7% or that 20% or whatever it is, that we understand that is now a problem. Now we can go about solving it. Second, we need a way to detect, right? So here's my really poor architect design of artwork of a magnifying glass. We need to find a way to detect. How do I make that problem expose itself? How do I make sure that instead of wandering around the organization looking for problems, that the problems essentially can make themselves clearer? They can put their hand up and say, here I am. In many organizations I visit, we put meeting upon meeting upon meeting together, and everybody reports out on everything. And one of the main reasons they're doing that is to try to find problems, right? I meet with executives and CEOs and managers who, they put their head on their pillow at night wondering what they're missing. I shouldn't wonder. And if I have the right mechanisms designed to find the problems, to put the hand up and say, here I am, well, when I do that, I can put my head on my pillow at night knowing the problems are going to find me. The problems are going to expose themselves when they need to be. I can't do that if I don't have a common definition of what is a problem, but I need a way to detect. How do we detect it? Third, I need a way to escalate that problem. I'll come back to step point 4. How do I escalate that problem? How do I get it to the people that need it? What is that mechanism? Does it sit around waiting for a meeting? Well, if I have a weekly meeting and problems need to be resolved in one day, that's going to be a horrible mechanism. Do I send somebody an email? Well, on top of everything else that's in their inbox, it's really easy to miss, right? So what is the way in which we escalate? I worked with one organization in the UK that at every level of the organization, they had boards. They had problem-solving boards where every leader that you went to had a board that they and their team dealt with. And if they wanted to capture every problem that they were going to do something with on their boards, they also had permission to put boards on each other's, or put problems on each other's boards. So just trying to grab another color here. Hopefully you guys still see my screen.
We're good. We can see the blue part and like half of the yellow.
Yep, perfect. Just want to make sure I don't want to lose that along the way. Grab another color here. So these leaders would have permission to find a problem and go put it on each other's boards because they're suppliers and customers to each other. And so they can escalate it to their boss's level. They can put it on their peers' board. These boards were essentially the standard for how you escalated your problems. So what happened is if somebody would stop Phil is his name, Phil in the hallway and say, Phil, we have a problem, he would immediately ask, did you put that on the board? And if the answer was no, he'd say, well, then don't talk to me. We have a way in which we capture our problems, in which we escalate, in which we communicate. We have a one single best way in which we do that, and that is these boards. So don't stop me in the hallway or drop me an email or do something else outside of our system, because that's how we lose them. That's how we lose track of what problems are important, what are we paying attention to. So I don't care what your system is to escalate. It could be an easel in the corner of an office where you write stuff up. It could be a database or a software system or Trello or some other tool where you capture ideas or capture problems and communicate them across. It doesn't have to be sophisticated. It can be sophisticated. But how do we capture and escalate those problems once they do occur? So that's the third component. Fourth is who can help, right? Who are we escalating to, right? There's sort of an assumption that most people assume that it should go up the organizational chart, but that's not always the case, right? Because especially if I have a very flat organization, that person might have 30 direct reports. Well, that's probably too many to go help with every problem. Where am I getting the help from? Should these problems go to? Now, if I have a bunch of boards, I might have that defined board by board or team by team, but I need to define who am I escalating problems to? Whose plate am I putting them onto? So we need a good who. And then finally, we need to define how to respond. What is the standard expectation? If I do send you an email about a problem, because that's our system and that's all we've gotten to, and I think that you should see the magnitude of this problem and hop on it right away, but you've got a bunch of other things, and you decide to hang on to it for a few days. Well, if we don't have a standard expectation of what a response looks like, we're going to get very sideways very fast. So what does that response look like? In many organizations, they start designing a standard escalation to bring it to the boss, whatever level in the organization that might be. Well, if every time I surface a problem, the boss comes to me and says, well, I hope you didn't have any plans this weekend because now I want you to go fix that problem. Well, I might think twice about escalating the next problem. If instead I get coaching, I get help, I get resources to help me overcome that problem, well, now maybe I'm more likely to raise it a second time. So the key is that how to respond is consistent. That we have a consistency in how we respond and when the problem is escalated to us. So there's a bunch of pieces here, but fundamentally, it's just an archetype of how you might think about a system. And we start thinking about, oops, grab the highlighter again. Start thinking about these different parts of the system. What is a problem? How do we detect problems? How do we escalate problems? Who do we escalate them to? And how do we respond? That at any level, I don't care if your team is 3 people and you're working out of a garage, or you're you're on 3 different continents and 7 different time zones. Either way, you need answers to those questions to build a system in which problems can get found, escalated, and solved. And that needs to be consistent from day in, day out. Now, the other part of this is the culture, as I mentioned, architecting the culture. So coming back to the leader, let's just imagine this leader goes off and is working with their team. Our culture, whatever culture you have, is a product of your people's experiences, right? So our culture can be defined as our principles or our beliefs, right? How we think about things ultimately drives our behaviors. Our behaviors are essentially the observable part of our culture. Those behaviors determine our actions in any one particular situation. and our actions determine our results. All right, so if I want to get problem solving better, I can give people new tools and ask for new actions, but ultimately, that's where the leverage is. Now, as a leader in the organization, where does our principles and behaviors come from? They come from our experiences. Right? The leader has to think about what experiences are they giving people that helps shape the culture. So let's just think about some behaviors, and I do like to define cultures in terms of behaviors, and let me say why. I cannot see how people think. That's very hard. This is inside somebody's head. Very hard to see it, right? But behaviors, I can observe it and I can role model it, which means they can see me. So I like to focus here at this level, even though it comes from how we think. When I start to articulate the behaviors, it's much easier to really drive and shape the culture that we want. So let's think about problem solving. Well, one example is I might want transparency. Right? That's a behavior, right? Now we can design our system to be more transparent inherently, but it's also a behavior. Do I expose problems? Do I shine a light on our problems before I need to? Right? Well, that makes it transparent. Do I make it transparent to everybody? Here's the problems that we have. I was working with one organization, doing a little observation, and I sat in on a team meeting, and they had a spreadsheet up, and they started going through all these problems one by one by one. And here's a problem, and here's what we're doing about it. Here's another problem. Here's what we're doing about it. Here's another problem. Here's what we're doing about it. Then they got to the end of the spreadsheet. And then they started talking about other problems that weren't written down. So I said, well, why aren't you writing those down? Oh, well, we don't know what we're going to do about them yet. We don't like to write them down until we know what we're going to do, because as soon as we write them down, everyone expects us to have an answer. Well, it's not a transparent culture, right? That's not about exposing the problems. It's only about exposing solutions. And so you can't solve problems that you can't see. Making the culture transparent is fundamental to making problem solving effective. Collaboration might be another one. Many of our most important problems happen across organizational boundaries. So if I have two different departments and team A experiences a problem that involves team B, and they go on this journey of coming up with a solution, and then they come over to team B with a solution, team B has really essentially two answers, yes or no. Reject or accept. That's all that's available to them. Well, instead, as soon as that problem occurs, if I come across and start to work with team B, and we agree on what's the problem statement, and we collaborate as we go through the process, and then we get to a solution, it's a very different behavior. Now, one of the reasons that we don't do that is because this path is often faster and easier to come up with a solution or a potential solution. But if we actually measure our success as what's faster to come up with an implemented working solution, well, then this collaborative path is far faster, right? But it's a very difficult behavior to get right. And no tools force that, right? We have to get the behaviors right along the way. Fundamentally, I believe that most problem solving is about learning. Right? So do we adopt a sense of curiosity? Are we curious about cause and effect? Why is the problem occurring in the way that it is? If you already know the answer, well, you don't have problem solving. You just implement the solution. Right? If your gas gauge says empty, right, you don't need to do problem solving. You just go to the fuel station, you put fuel in your car. Right? It's that simple. But if you don't know the answer, right, if it's not that simple, well, then we have to learn. We have knowledge that we have to go gain. And so I like to say problem solving is about closing our knowledge gaps before we close our performance gaps. But if I'm going to just assume what the answer is, then all my problem solving tools are just a fake. They're just a facade. If I instead approach it with curiosity, well, then I'm much more likely to treat it like the learning job that it is. All problem solving is a learning task. And if I don't approach it with curiosity, I'm not going to get there. So for leaders to shape that culture, they have to do two things. One, they have to articulate it. You have to know what culture you actually want, what set of behaviors you actually want. Otherwise, you're going to end up with what I call an accidental culture. You're going to end up with a culture, but it's not necessarily the one that you want. And two, I have to design those experiences. Right? So these two things have to come together. As a leader, how do I design the experiences that start to shape people's behaviors, that start to shape how they think? And so that's my job as a leader, to be clear about the behaviors, the culture that drives a good problem solving environment. And second, that we give them experiences that help shape that culture. So we end up with a deliberate culture instead of an accidental one. So coming back here, those were two key things around architecting both our system and our culture. Right? You as the leader are responsible, are accountable, are ultimately the person that must drive, that must architect those two elements. Now, within problem solving, let's just say we decide to start that, we have to shape and coach our problem solving. So let's just say we have a team, and a team wants to, they articulate a problem. They come to you and say, hey, we experienced this problem. We're going to go move forward and do some work. Well, how are you going to send them forward? How are you going to shape that? Well, there's a couple key components that you need to be really thoughtful about. You need to think about, what is the problem statement, right? What gap are they really trying to solve? That's sort of their front door, right? As they go forward and get to an answer, what's the conditions of satisfaction? What I mean by that is, what has to be true for me to be happy as a leader? If you come back to me with a solution that really doesn't close the gap, probably not going to be happy. But if you come back to me with a perfect solution in 18 months, is that exactly what I was looking for? Or would I have preferred a 20% solution next week? Well, that's very different with the conditions of satisfaction. If we need to collaborate in order to effectively solve this problem, well, maybe one of my conditions of satisfaction is that this other team is on board as you get to a solution. You telling me that you have an answer that these other folks aren't on board with doesn't meet my conditions of satisfaction. So what does the finish line look like? Right? When I get to that finish line of our problem solving effort, what does good look like for the conditions of satisfaction for that problem? And what's the guardrails along the way? Right? What do you have to pay attention to? What should you not touch? Please don't mess with these things. Keep these things in consideration. But you're basically defining their box of problem solving. How do they go about it? So just end of last week, I was working with a large hospital system, the chief medical officer and her staff. So the head of every major function, from surgery to neurosurgery to orthopedics to the emergency department. And we talked about some work that's been done around transportation. So transportation is essentially moving patients around the hospital. Most of the time, where a department that has patients, they will talk about this transportation department and say, they're always late. They need to go fix the problem. Well, that's one way to shape it, right? You're basically kind of dumping on them and saying, go solve your problem, right? I'm worried about these patients. You're not moving patients well enough. Well, there's a lot of different ways to solve that. Are we going to try to solve that hospital wide across one function? Solve it short term, solve it long term, solve it collaboratively, solve it differently? Is it an opportunity for people to learn while problem solving? How are we shaping this problem that everybody's complaining about? So in one particular instance, we said, well, no, let's solve this collaboratively. Let's not just dump on transportation and say, go solve it. Let's really understand it as a collaborative, shared problem solving effort. So once they started to do that, they started to look at the actual units, the actual patients' wings that would deliver care, and said, how do we contribute to this transportation problem? Well, as they started asking that question as part of problem solving, they realized that, one of the reasons that there is delays in transportation is that the demand for transportation has these huge spikes on it. One of the main reasons for that is that the units that are discharging patients discharge a whole lot of patients all at once. Why are they doing that? Well, because if the patients are still in their care at a certain time, then they have to order lunch for them. Then they have to make sure that they get the lunch order in, the lunches get served, and all of this. So if they get them out before that hits, it's one less thing for them to have to worry about. And if they miss that window, well, now they have extra work that they have to do. The problem is that this surge would come along, and now transportation can't keep up. Well, that's the type of problem that can be best solved collaboratively, that can be best solved when these groups work together. And sure enough, they did. They came up with some solutions, and now the problem is not gone, but dramatically better. And again, if all they did was keep dumping on transportation, saying, you guys got to solve it, you guys got to solve it, you guys got to solve it, and they never looked at how they contribute to it, it never would have gone nearly as far as it did. There's only so much that transportation unit could do along the way. Now, shaping the problem statement, really starts to be what the leader does with that team or that individual. Do I want it to be collaborative? How long do I want it to take place? Where are you headed with all this? And essentially make sure you're pointing them off in the right direction. What you really want to avoid is you get to the end of this. And some comes to the end and they say, hey, here's our solution. And a leader says, nope, not gonna buy it. I worked with one team that did some really good problem solving effort, but their leader, their site director, would not approve their solution. And so essentially they were asking me for advice and coaching on what they did wrong, what did they miss, what wasn't right. So we went back through this entire effort of work, which took a couple of months, went back through all of their problem solving effort and reviewed all of it. It was excellent work. They really did a great job, great analysis, great curiosity, great creativity in coming up with solutions. So I got to the end and said, well, do you agree, or does your site leader agree that the problem that you're solving is actually a problem? I said, no, they don't agree that it's a problem. Well, geez, no wonder they're not going to agree to the solution if they don't even agree that your problem statement isn't actually a problem. They might agree that it exists, but they don't think it's a problem worth solving. So if it's not worth solving, then how are they going to agree that your solution is worth their energy, worth their resources, worth their time to go make sure it gets in place? So you really have to make sure that we've shaped that at the very front, that before teams go off and do all this work, that they're actually working on something that makes sense to them, makes sense to the leader, and then we have some alignment around. Now, the other part of this is the coaching. What happens along the way from a coaching standpoint? So coaching to me is absolutely essential for problem solving success. Um, Two benefits to this. One is that you're shaping how somebody thinks. They're going to solve many problems after you're done coaching them. If you can make them 5% more effective, 50% more effective, imagine how much work that's going to affect going forward for your organization. Second, I believe that unlike certain things around coaching, that we get better at problem solving even faster through coaching than doing problem solving. Why? Because the person that you're coaching is focused on both their how, right? How they're doing problem solving, and what? The topic of their problem solving. But the coach is almost entirely focused on the how. And so for that reason, I believe that when you start coaching problem solving, you get smarter about how to solve problems even faster than the coachee does. And so that's why I believe this is really worth investing your time into, because you do more and more coaching or problem solving, well, you get better at it yourself because you get really thoughtful about how we go about this. Now, what's important is that when you're doing coaching, that you're really helping shape their experiences. What I mean by that is that you're not giving them the answer, you're asking questions. We ask questions, and ultimately it has to be their answers. Because only if they get to shape their problem solving, do they take ownership over the learnings they get out of it. Anytime that we jump in and short circuit their ownership, we've stopped coaching. Now, there's a time and a place to do that. If you're in a burning building and somebody's there with you, you don't stop and go, hey, what's our problem statement and how could we test our ideas? You grab them by the arm and you pull them out the door. Right? You've got to solve that problem. You don't coach. You basically take over ownership of that problem because risk is too important. Time is of the essence. The impact is too great. Whatever the conditions, sometimes it's not right to coach. But fundamentally, if we're going to let them learn and have learning, we have two types of questions. Guiding questions, which is helping them develop their plan. How are they going to go forward with their next step? Now, it's generally not, one set of coaching questions at the very beginning. It might be one step at a time. Go take a step, do some work, come back to me. I'll ask some other questions so you can have a plan for your next steps, and then your next steps, and then your next steps. Sometimes you need to ask all those questions at once, but fundamentally best done along the way. And then the other type of questions are the reflection questions. This is where we look back and essentially learn from what we've already experienced. So the guiding question sets them on their path, makes sure that they're going forward in a thoughtful, deliberate way. They're ready to take their next questions. Who do you think you need to talk to before you take your next step? Where can you gather more data? How do you know this problem is worth solving? How can you go about understanding root cause of that problem? How can you understand the impact that that problem has? Those are all guiding questions. They set the actions that the person is going to take place. The reflection questions is helping them learn from their experience. Did you rush to a solution too quickly? Should you have talked to more people? Should you have gone slower earlier so you could go fast later? Did you have a clear way in which you might test your solution once you came up with it? Asking your reflection questions are the types of questions that probably don't have a right answer. But just by asking them forces the person you're coaching to think about what they did and learn the most from it. There's an old quote that's one of my favorite, which is experience is not what you've been through, it's what you take away from that experience. And so making sure that reflection happens is really one of the main jobs of a coach. Not just rushing on to the next problem and the next problem and the next problem, because we're not going to get better that way. We're just going to repeat the same mistakes over and over and over again. stopping and forcing them to reflect helps us take the most away from the experiences that we have. And so making sure that we do our coaching becomes fundamentally along with shaping as that happens. Now, last point I want to make before we'll see what questions you all have. We'll have some time for questions. Haven't gotten any along the way here, so maybe you're holding those questions for the end. But is understanding as a leader, what problem should I be solving? There's a mistake that most leaders make, that many leaders make, I'm willing to say most, and what I call the fallacy of the 25 problems problem. And what that means is that let's just imagine you're this leader. There you are, and you have 5 direct reports, right? Many of us have more than 5 direct reports, but we'll just use this for simple math. And we see that each one of our direct reports has 5 problems. We go and talk to them, and they can define 5 problems they're working on. So here's the myth. We think that means that we have 25 problems that we care about, right? My team's problems are my problems. They each have 5. I have 5 direct reports. There's 25 problems there. That's the myth. And that's the problem, is that these are their problems, right? So not only do we think wrongly about being overloaded by problems, right? Oh, I have all these problems in my organization. Look at all these problems, 25 problems, 2,500 problems, whatever the number might be. And then we get overwhelmed by this giant pile of problems. Or we go in and we cherry pick our favorite ones, right? Either because they impact our customer in a certain way, or we think they're super big, or we just like them. So we go cherry pick them, and now our team is left guessing, hey, when's our leader going to jump the line and circumvent our responsibility and go solve these problems for us? And so they learn to kind of, hey, I'm not going to take any problem too far until I know what problems the leader wants to solve for themselves and what problems they don't. All of those become a mistake. But fundamentally, right, we can shape these, right? We can coach these, but these are their problems. Now, what we should really be doing is looking at these problems to say, what can we learn from them? Right now, this requires that we really look at this in a way that says, if I go down here and I start to do direct observation, I start to go see what these 25 problems are all about. Maybe there's some lessons that come back that tell me what my 5 problems are. Maybe there's some patterns in this set of stuff. Maybe it's about a cross-functional problem where we continue to have problems with the transportation department first, and we say, okay, no, we need to go look at how is that working? How do we collaborate on this problem across the organization? Or we start to see that there's a set of behaviors that's behind a whole bunch of these. And so that means I have a cultural problem that I have to solve. Or we're not very good at problem solving. So I see the same problems show up again and again. And so I have to coach on our problem solving capability. What is broken in my organization? These 25 problems, that is my information. That is telling me so much about what my team is experiencing, what they're struggling with, what's broken in my system, what's broken in my culture, what's broken in my capabilities. And those are the problems that I want to take over ownership of as a leader. What's important is that if I jump down and try to spend too much time solving these problems, I never get up, I never come back up to the top and start to solve problems at a broader level, to solve the more structural problems that exist in the organization. A guy who's really, really good at this is Jeff Bezos. It's not about disengaging from the details. So I want to be super clear about this. This does not mean be hands off. This does not mean kind of delegate or over delegate, or just let everybody have total control and autonomy about the problems they're going to go solve. This means getting into the details in a way that teaches me about what's working and what's not working. So Jeff Bezos would spend, and I assume he doesn't spend as much time doing this anymore, but for many, many years, he'd spend time in the call center dealing with customer complaints. And what was great is that these customer complaints would tell him about what's going on in the system. So let me give you an example of something that he would learn, take away from this, is that he was taking a customer call one time. So they have automated system, the phone number comes in, up pops their last order. And just because that's probably what they're calling about. And so this the customer, the experienced customer call person sitting next to him says, "Oh, that's a table." The table pops up on the screen. Experienced person says, "That table is going to be a return for damage." He thinks, how on earth could she know that? Right? There's no data here. There's no information, but she seems to know why they might solve it or why they might be returning it. So he takes the call, he processes the call, and sure enough, this customer is going to return this table for damage. So after the call, he turns to the experienced person and says, "How did you know that?" And she says, "Oh, that table is always returned for damage because they package it wrong." Now, many managers at that point would say, "Oh, we have a packaging problem with a table." They would find that problem, they would run off, they would go find the manager on the other side that's responsible for that, and they'd go hammer away on them and say, go solve that packaging problem. But that's not changing the system. That's not changing the architecture of how things work. Instead, what he learns is, well, geez, what we know about this problem that isn't being solved. Are there other problems like that? And he finds, oh yeah, there's other problems where we know what's wrong, it's not getting fixed. So he studies this information. And instead of just going off and beating somebody up for not solving that problem, he goes off and says, the problem is that when the customer call center experiences a problem, right, there's no mechanism to force those problem owners to go come up with a solution. So he comes up with his own innovation. Is he comes up with the one click. This is similar to the buy now button that customers get to experience, but in the customer call center, there's a button. And on that button is you basically get to kill a product unable to be sold. You basically delete the buy now button. So anyone in the call center has access to this button, and with one click, they can disable the buy now button. Now, there's two reasons for this. One, we're going to prevent harming any more customers. We're not going to ship any more tables to customers when we already know that we package it wrong. Second, the person that is ultimately responsible for gets that message. Now they want to go sell tables. That's their job. I own this product line. I want to sell tables. You can't sell any more tables until you go and fix their problem. Go fix their problem. Now there's a closed loop. Now I'm heavily incentivized to go back and fix that problem so the customer call center can re-enable my sale, right? So going back to the architecture I drew earlier, right? We define what is a problem, something chronic. How does the call center detect it? How do they escalate it? Well, who are they escalating it to? And now the person can't, until they respond and fix that problem, they can't sell another unit. And that was one of Jeff Bezos's tiny little innovations, tiny little changes to the system, tiny little problems that he solved that dramatically made other people's problem solving that much more effective. So what happens if we fail to do that? we just go across, we solve that one little problem because we heard about a table that isn't being fixed, and we miss the bigger problem that we as a leader should solve. So make sure that we're solving problems at the right level, right? Whatever that right level is, everybody is closest to some part of work. We should let the people closest to that part of work be the one that owns solving those problems. And that includes what should we be solving as a leader. It's not what we used to solve when we used to do that job. We have to learn to solve problems at a different level. So I threw a bunch of stuff at you. Let me kind of zoom out here, summary of some of what we've done. Let's see what questions we have. We have a little time left before the top of the hour. So thinking your
Everyone,
yep.
everyone check out your chat and your Q&A buttons at the bottom of your screen there, and just go ahead and submit some. We have time for a couple questions. I know there's a lot of information we just took in, so anything's fair game.
Anything is fair game. And I love questions. So who's
Let's
got
see.
one?
It might not have any. Let's see. Well, wait a minute.
Well, while we're waiting, let me just talk about one other thing as we do this. So many people think about how they get smarter at problem solving, whether they're in a leadership role or not, right? So whether they're in that role or not, how do they get smarter at problem solving? And one of the things that I think is absolutely essential is we have to break out of our comfort zone. There's if any of you have ever broken your hand and had a cast on your hand, and if it's on your writing hand, you make some adjustments. You learn how to write with the other hand at least a little bit, but you also know in a couple of weeks I get to go back and I get to write with my hand, so I don't have to invest too much time. Well, imagine if you lost your hand, right, as way too many people have done. Well, now you have to learn, right? And many people that go through that get quite adept at learning how to write with their other hand. There's also been cases where people have lost both their hands, mostly, former veterans, which is how they lost them. And they've learned how to overcome and adopt, and they can write with their feet, become very skilled at learning a new way. Well, problem solving is similar. We've been problem solving since we've been infants. And so if we stay writing with our dominant hand, if we stay in our comfort zone, solving problems the same way every time, well, then we're not going to get better, right? Because it doesn't force us to do things in a different way. So you've got to shrink your comfort zone. You've got to step outside your comfort zone, whether that's trying to solve problems in a different way, finding someone to coach you, learn a new tool, learn a new method, solve problems that are different than the types of problems you've solved in the past. It's the only way we learn, because again, we spent so much time solving problems, we actually are fairly oblivious to what we know how to do and what we don't.
That's a great point, and I really appreciate that. We do have a couple minutes if there's any last minute questions that have popped up. Jamie, I want to thank you for being with us today and everyone who attended. You will receive a recap. It'll have the resources mentioned and a link to rewatch it and to share the webinar with your team. Be sure to visit the events tab at petracoach.com to see what all workshops and webinars we have coming up. And that's where you can also access all of our previous webinars with experts like Jamie. If there's anything else we can do, drop us a line at info@petracoach.com. And again, thank you for being with us today. Everyone have a great Monday.